What if the loudest person in the room isn't the one with the microphone, but the one who says absolutely nothing? What if the most powerful presence isn't the person making headlines or shouting orders, but the one sitting silently in the corner, watching, listening, unmoved? That man, that woman, the one who doesn't need to compete. They don't force their voice into the noise, because they know something the rest of us have forgotten. Stillness speaks. Let me tell you about Julian. Venice was alive that morning. San Marco Square buzzed like a beehive. Tourists spilling over, gondoliers shouting for fares, cafe waiters carrying trays, pigeons fluttering into chaos. It was beautiful in that overwhelming, restless kind of way. But there was one figure who didn't move with the current. He stood alone in front of the basilica, hands in his coat, eyes fixed, not on anything, but into everything. No phone, no camera, no distraction, just stillness. People passed him and slowed down without knowing why. A few turned their heads. Some whispered. One man even asked his wife, "Do you think he's famous?" He wasn't. He was just still, utterly, unshakably still. And in that stillness, he drew more attention than all the noise around him. You see, we live in a time where attention is currency. Everyone's trying to be seen, heard, liked, shared. And in the process, we've forgotten something ancient, something powerful, something sacred. Silence is not emptiness. It is a decision. It is a stance. It is the loudest form of self-control. The quietest people are not quiet because they have nothing to say. They're quiet because they're filtering the noise inside them before adding to the noise outside. That's why when they finally do speak, people listen. They think before they speak. They observe before they act. They don't chase depth. They are depth. Their power isn't performative. It's internal. You've probably met someone like that before. At work, at a party, in a relationship. They didn't talk over people. They didn't interrupt. They didn't network. But by the end of the night, everyone remembered them. Why? Because when they made eye contact, they saw you. When they listened, it felt like silence was being poured into your chest. When they spoke, it felt like they had been holding their words in a vault, waiting for just the right moment to hand you the key. The Stoics called this living with intention. They believed that every word you speak should serve a purpose, not a performance. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And for people who speak less, you can't fake this kind of presence. You can't Photoshop depth. You can't filter stillness. You either live it or you don't. Julian didn't stand out because he was trying to. He stood out because he didn't need to. And that's what this story is really about. It's about a new kind of power, one that doesn't come from status, volume, or performance. It comes from being deeply rooted, from speaking only when your soul knows it's time, from letting your silence do the heavy lifting. Because here's the paradox. In a world addicted to noise, the quietest voices hit the hardest. If you've ever felt like you don't belong in the noise, if you've ever chosen stillness over shouting, if you've ever felt your silence misunderstood, this is your story. And trust me, the rest of this journey will show you the 10 traits that define people like Julian, and maybe people like you. But before we continue, if this message already speaks to something deep inside you, something the modern world often silences, then consider subscribing to this channel. It helps us create more content like this. More space, more stillness, more truth. Your support isn't just a number. It's a quiet revolution, one click at a time. Now, for a quick challenge to bring you closer to this story. Quiz time. Which quality do you personally resonate with more? A. Thinking deeply before speaking, even if it means staying silent. B. Speaking your truth instantly, even if you haven't fully thought it through. Comment A or B below and tell us why. Let's see how many quiet minds are really out there. We'll continue in the next part how these silent individuals shape the inner architecture of their world, while the rest are busy just making noise. Stay tuned. What quiet people build while others are busy speaking. While the world races for visibility, those who speak less retreat inward, not to escape, but to build. Because beneath the still surface of the quiet lies something immense, powerful, and meticulously constructed. An inner world that cannot be shaken by applause or torn down by criticism. Quiet people are not merely silent, they are intentional. And this intent is not random, it is architectural. Where most people react, they respond. Where others collapse under pressure, they center themselves. While the masses chase the next viral moment, they design lives that don't need to be seen to be meaningful. Their silence is not emptiness, it is scaffolding, and that scaffolding holds more than we think. Rachel, the Manhattan attorney who we met briefly before, is a living example. In a city defined by arguments, her restraint is not just unusual, it's revolutionary. People often mistake her calm demeanor for passivity. They assume she'll crack under pressure. But they don't understand that her silence isn't submission, it's structure. Rachel has built her inner world like a fortress, disciplined, self-contained, and guided by values, not emotions. One Wednesday afternoon, in the middle of a high-stakes case, an opposing counsel launched into a verbal assault. It was personal, biting, designed to rattle. Everyone in the courtroom waited for Rachel to respond. She didn't. Not because she had no answer, but because she had already decided, long before walking in, that nothing said in anger would ever hijack her peace. She waited, she breathed, and when she spoke, it was surgical. 5 sentences dismantled the argument with no raised voice, no emotional detour, and no wasted motion. That moment didn't happen because she's naturally quiet. It happened because she is radically self-controlled. And that brings us to one of the defining traits of the quiet. They don't fight every battle, because they've already won the war inside. Self-control for them is not repression, it's sovereignty. They are not ruled by moods, triggers, or provocations. Their silence is not a shutdown, it's a strategy. They understand that emotional impulsiveness is expensive. It costs energy, clarity, reputation, and often dignity. Instead, they store their energy like sacred currency, spending it only where it matters most. That's why you'll often see quiet people respond to chaos, not with panic, but with pause. In fact, many of them live by an internal rule: never speak from the peak of emotion, because they've learned that what's said in reaction often requires apology. What's said in reflection becomes legacy. But this level of restraint isn't natural, it's cultivated, and it grows in silence. Just ask Maya, the Boston teacher with eyes sharper than her words. She's taught hundreds of students and never once raised her voice. Her classroom isn't loud, but it's alive. Because within that quiet, something sacred happens. She notices. She sees the student who keeps asking for pencils, not because he's forgetful, but because he needs interaction. She senses when a usually bright girl suddenly avoids eye contact, not because she's distracted, but because something's breaking at home. Maya's classroom is a place where listening is louder than speaking, and her students, though young, feel it. They know they are seen, even without being asked to perform. This power to observe deeply is the second pillar of the quiet person's architecture. It allows them to move through life, not just as participants, but as interpreters. They don't just experience moments, they read them. And from this comes empathy. Because the moment you stop talking, you start noticing. And when you notice, really notice, you begin to understand people not as categories, but as living stories. This makes quiet individuals incredibly effective in high-stakes situations, even if they don't always hold the official titles. That's what happened to Omar in Detroit. He's a grief counselor who rarely gives advice. Instead, he gives space. His method? Presence, not performance. He once sat with a grieving father who had lost his daughter to a drunk driver. The man raged for 45 minutes. He screamed at the world, at the system, at God. And Omar, he never interrupted, never corrected, never redirected. When the storm finally passed, the father whispered, "You're the first person who actually let me be broken without fixing me." That's the impact of true listening. And Omar's capacity to hold space doesn't come from training. It comes from discipline. The kind of discipline most overlook because it's not flashy. It's silent. People often equate discipline with routine. Wake up at 5 a.m., hit the gym, make the bed. But for quiet people, discipline is deeper. It's about alignment. It's the consistent, often invisible practice of living by your principles, even when no one is watching. Carl, the Denver running coach, knows this well. His athletes used to call him the monk coach because of his early morning routines. Meditation before warm-ups, breathing practice before sprints. To Carl, the body isn't just an engine, it's a messenger. It gives you a place to return when the world outside becomes too much. For the quiet, the mind isn't a battlefield, it's a temple. And everything they do, from how they start their morning to how they handle heartbreak, is designed to keep that temple clean. Even their routines reflect this architecture. While others blast news in the background, they begin the day with quiet walks. While the world scrambles to respond to notifications, they protect the first hour of the day like it's sacred. No phone, no input, just breath, just reflection. This isn't just preference, it's preservation. Because the quiet knows something the world keeps forgetting. When you own your inner rhythm, the outer world can't control your direction. And that brings us to the most misunderstood part of their architecture, their relationship with solitude. Unlike the lonely, quiet people don't fear being alone. They seek it, not as an escape, but as an ecosystem. In silence, they sort through tangled thoughts. In solitude, they strip off personas. And in stillness, they remember who they are before the world told them who to be. That's why so many of them engage in practices most would avoid. Weekend retreats without phones, solo hikes in national parks, morning journaling by candlelight. Because solitude isn't a symptom, it's a system. A system for renewal, for regulation, for recalibration. You'll find these people in Yosemite at 6 a.m., standing barefoot in the dew. You'll find them in libraries, reading without noise-canceling headphones, because they want the sound of their own mind. You'll find them walking the beach alone at sunset, not posting a photo of the ocean, but talking to it. And while the world may scroll past them, they are watching the world, deeply, patiently, reverently. All of this, the discipline, the listening, the emotional restraint, the solitude, adds up to one undeniable truth. Quiet people don't just live in the world, they build within it. And while others are chasing external architecture, careers, likes, status, validation, the quiet are crafting inner architecture no storm can destroy. When Rachel steps into a courtroom, when Maya steps into a classroom, when Omar steps into a grief circle, when Carl steps onto the track, their presence speaks long before they do. Not because they're trying to impress, but because they've already impressed truth upon themselves. So, if you've ever been told you're too quiet, too introspective, too in your head, remember this. Maybe they couldn't hear you, because they've never stood in a place quiet enough to listen. But you have, and from that silence, you've built something most people only dream of. A life not dependent on approval, a mind not enslaved to noise, a heart strong enough to hold truth without shouting it. That's the architecture no one sees, but everyone feels. And in part 3, we'll explore what happens when this inner strength steps out into the world and changes it without making a sound. Because sometimes the most revolutionary force is a whisper.
Julian never needed to be loud to be heard. His silence wasn't weakness, it was presence. While the world sprinted forward chasing validation, he stood rooted in something far more powerful: intention. Rachel didn't fight to be right in a courtroom full of voices. She didn't react, over-explain, or raise her tone. Instead, she remained anchored, because she had already won the battles that mattered most, the ones within. Maya transformed an ordinary classroom into a sanctuary, not with booming lectures or dramatic performances, but with quiet attention. She didn't need to speak over her students to reach them. Her silence became a mirror through which they saw themselves. Omar, the grief counselor, proved that you don't have to fix someone's pain to help them heal. You only have to hold space long enough for them to feel safe in their sorrow. His silence gave others permission to be fully human. And Carl? The coach who trained not just athletes, but minds. He taught that success isn't found in loud celebration, but in quiet repetition. His runners didn't just win medals, they learned how to run toward their own center. Each of them lived differently, but they shared a sacred trait. They didn't just speak less, they lived more deliberately. The world around them was chaotic, always calling for more, faster, louder. But they built something quietly profound. An inner architecture strong enough to withstand storms. A life crafted not for attention, but for meaning. In a culture addicted to performance, their restraint was radical. In a society obsessed with visibility, their depth was revolutionary. And that's the true essence of what it means to live as a quiet force. The story isn't just about them, it's about us. We live in a time where silence is mistaken for absence, where slow is confused with lazy, where depth is overlooked for what's trending. But if you followed this story to the end, maybe it's because something inside you knows you're not here to impress the crowd. You're here to honor the truth inside you.
And maybe that truth doesn't always need a stage. Maybe it needs a sanctuary. The lesson is this: you don't have to shout to make an impact. You don't need to post every thought to feel seen. You don't need to react to everything that triggers you. You can be the calm in the storm, the clarity in the noise, the presence in the chaos. Here's how you can begin applying this today. Pause before responding. Give your thoughts time to breathe. Choose intentional silence during conflict, anxiety, or uncertainty. Spend time alone, not in loneliness, but in reflection. Value listening over speaking. Hear what's unsaid. Build inner discipline, small routines, steady boundaries, deep commitment. Because the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more depth. And maybe that begins with you. Now it's your turn to reflect and share. Let's create space for your voice. Quiz time. Which path feels more like your natural tendency? A. I often listen more than I speak, and I reflect before reacting. B. I usually speak my mind quickly, and silence makes me uncomfortable. Comment A or B below. Let us know where you are on the spectrum. There's no right or wrong answer, just insight. What do you think about the idea that silence is power? Have you experienced moments where saying less changed everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your perspective. If this video stirred something real inside you, support this channel by subscribing. Your support helps us keep creating content with soul, depth, and meaning. Because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that change us the most. And we're just getting started.